I'm so honored to moderate this conversation with three of North America's top diplomats. We have Ambassador Graham Clark, Canada's ambassador to Mexico. We have Ambassador Esteban Moctezuma, Mexico's ambassador to the United States, of course, and Ambassador Ken Salazar, US ambassador to Mexico. So there are a lot of topics we want to cover today. There's so many issues that we've touched on over the past 2 days. Everything from inclusive economic development, trade and nearshoring, migration and labor mobility, democracy and governance, security, and that's just to name a few. So in order to make sure we have time to get to questions, I'm going to be strict with time. So I've asked each ambassador to open up with 3 to 5 minutes of opening remarks, and then I'll ask a series of questions and open it up to you. So why don't we start with you, Ambassador Clark?
Thank you very much. And just to say how thrilled I am to be here again at 8 a.m. as I was last year, how much I admire the North Capital Forum, the value added of the discussions that we have here, and how much I admire the inter-American dialogue as well, which I got to know when I served as ambassador at the OAS many moons ago. You know, we're living a historic moment in North America, and we need to take advantage of it. We need to catch the wave. We can't afford, not to catch that wave. And that's one of the conclusions of my own 4 years here. I'm entering my fifth year as ambassador, and I'm more than ever convinced that we're living that hinge moment in North America, and then we've got to get it right. So that's the first thing I'd say. The second thing I'd say is we in government really need the private sector to speak up and to make the case for the arrangements that we have made in North America to govern our trade, right? Whether you call it the CUSMA, the USMCA, or the TEMEC, we need you to speak up. We need you to explain the benefits of this, not just for the private sector, but for our societies as a whole as we look to 2026. We have trilateral mechanisms which really work quite well, which we have to nurture, which we have to sustain, which we have to use. And we'll be hearing more, I think, from the Sherpas on the NALS process later on this morning, but simply a pitch to say, aren't we fortunate to have these mechanisms in North America? There are not a lot of regions that have, regular leader level summits, for instance, or that have technical meetings of ministers or secretaries. We need to, and this is to perhaps some of the questions, Rebecca, that you're going to be asking us later on, we need to nurture our shared values, pluralism, democracy, diversity. I was very struck last night. I was listening to Maru Campos, who's the governor of Chihuahua, who gave an extraordinary defense of democratic governance, not simply in Chihuahua and in Mexico, but throughout the Americas. And I was very struck by that, by her passion and by what she had to put on the table. We have to explore and channel that passion. And finally, my final thing is that we need to get to know each other better in North America. To an American, or rather to a Mexican, North America is the US and Mexico. To a Canadian, North America is Canada and the US. To an American, North America is the US, right? And we've got to think regionally. We've got to think regionally, right? And that means thinking from, and I put this on the board outside, thinking from the Yukon to the Yucatan about our reality in this region. Or you want to say Whitehorse to Oaxaca, or Newfoundland to Nogales, or whatever. But we really need to think as a region, and we need to think about our interests and our future as a region.
Thank you so much. Ambassador Moctezuma.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. Thank all of you for coming. And this is my third time in the North American Capital Forum. And I think it's a very interesting idea that is becoming a dialogue that will be institutionalized. And I think that's very, very important because actions and things happen when they start with ideas. Now, I'd like to recognize the organizers, especially Enrique Perret. But I want to just to share you a thought that has been in my mind lately, which is like in the social media, everybody gathers together with people that think similarly. So all of us here in this room are advocates of North America, and that's very important. But I think that one important aspect of our mission, if we really are advocates, is to start touching other groups that don't think North America it's a good idea or that don't have even an idea of North America. I think that commitment to action is needed because the whole world has a geopolitical realignment. And the paths we're taking in each nation and the path we're taking regionally, as Ambassador Clark said, it's very important. So one thing that I want us to think about is how can we spread this dialogue, spread this North American idea into other different forums and other different spaces. If you think about the United States and think about the election that is coming and listen to the rhetoric that is going on around Mexico, you sure will be convinced that there is a lot to do in order to convince many, many people that the future of the United States is with Mexico, that it's not a matter of choice. It's something that is needed. And I also believe, as Ambassador Clark said, that we have to broaden our vision in order to have a regional approach of Canada, the USA, and Mexico in many, many aspects that are needed. Everybody agrees that action has to be taken regarding climate change. And I think that the three countries have a very important conversation about it. So that's one path that we can follow in order to ask people to join in the idea of a trilateral effort. With the merge of Canadian Pacific and Kansas City Railroad, now we have what I call the backbone of an infrastructural proof of what North America is, because you can see that the railroad passes through the three countries really like the backbone. The infrastructure is another theme that can join people into the idea of North America. We have the World Cup, and I think that's a very strong idea. Many times politicians don't really take care about sports, but people are passionate about sports. So we can also make people passionate about North America regarding football. So there are many ways to talk about North America, avoiding the irritants which are present in many conversations. And that would be my opening statement, to try to make an effort to join different groups that think differently in order to make them think that North America, it's a very good idea.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. Ambassador Salazar.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. Let me first say it's an honor to be here. And it's an honor to be part of a dialogue which has been going on for a long time beyond this particular forum. But I want to say just a couple of things and acknowledge some of our partners who are in the trenches with us every day. And two of those are up here on the stage, and that's Ambassador Esteban Montezuma and Ambassador Graham Clark. I want to give them a round of applause because we work like brothers. There's no doubt about that. Tanto que los quiero. And that's true. We sometimes will communicate multiple times. We just came off, Esteban and I did the high-level security dialogue yesterday, which was a massive undertaking. And so it's the kind of work that we do every day. Secondly, I want to say to Enrique and to the US-Mexico Foundation, who's now part of the Comexias board, which is a big initiative of our presidents and us on trying to move forward with lifting up the number of Mexicanos studying in the US and US studying in Mexico. And we ought to do the same thing in Canada, Graham. But thank you for doing this. Thank you for enhancing the dialogue. I see so many other friends. From AmCham, Daniel Baima, Emilio, all of you. So let me, got Giovanni, UNHCR. So I could go on saying thank you to everybody. But I want the consul generals of Mission Mexico in Mexico, if you would stand, please. Eric, Dorothy, Roger, Miden. So much about this is the communication, right? I see some of you here, my friends from Nuevo Laredo and other places, Laredo, that are very interested in what's happening in that big artery of commerce, or what's happening in Juarez real time today as we're trying to deal with a whole host of issues there. These folks are in the front lines, and it's my honor to be able to work with them every day. So let me, Rebecca, make just a couple comments. First of all, I agree with everything that Graham and Esteban says. It should not be any surprise. And so let me make 3 or 4 points in my 3 minutes. One is dialogue is so important, and you're doing it here. And frankly, one of the greatest risks that you have is when you don't have dialogue. And for 5 years, prior to 3 years ago, there was very little dialogue between the United States and Mexico. We're back, high-level economic dialogue last week in Washington, high-level security dialogue here this week, meetings of the presidents that we've had, upcoming meetings that we'll have with the president soon. So that's dialogue. The North American Leaders Summit held here 8th, 9th, 10th of January. That was the Minister Trudeau, President AMLO, and President Joe Biden getting together and saying, hey, we got to do this together. Underscoring the reality of that is that there is this economic and legal durable framework called USMCA. Tremendous support by all parties. You don't have to be a Democrat to support USMCA or Republican in the US. And in that, you see the integration of the North American economy through supply chains and so many other things. It's, to me, no surprise at all. Esteban said that he did it all by himself. I don't believe him, but he said, since I became ambassador, the United States and Mexico became the #1 trading partners in the world, surpassing China. I say, good job, Esteban, keep it up. and our status with Canada is, as you always know, it's always been terrific. So you just ought to take a minute and say, it's okay. It's okay that we're the #1 trading partners in the world. I'd sure as hell rather be the #1 trading partner, the United States and Mexico, than I would with China, than I would with other countries in the world. So I think that's something that we can celebrate, that we are making it real. So first, you have a durable framework in USMCA up for reauthorization in 2026. I expect there may be some changes, but I think it's going to go very well. 2, the reality of it is that integration is happening in a real fast pace. And then just a couple of points that I think are keystone to that integration. The first of those is in technology, and using the integration of our supply chains, especially in areas like semiconductors, minerals, so many other things where we have some great advantages of here in North America. And so the integration of supply chains really is at the heart of what drives much of the work that we do out of the White House and we do out of the departments in the United States. And in that, I would say we should always keep focused on what the highest priorities are. And for us, one of those highest priorities is creating a modern, safe, and secure border. It's a lot easier said than done. But when one looks at where we want to be in 2030 and 2040, 2050, you can have borders like the ones that exist all over the world, which don't frankly function very well, or you can really have the most modern, safe, and secure borders that are possible, even in some of the hotbeds that we have along the border, Matamoros, Brownsville. The concepts of smart borders using technology and what we're doing there really are working very well. So we need to do a lot more of that to cross our 2,000-mile border, but it goes beyond that. It goes to the ports of Mexico, where we have a very robust partnership with Mexican government, including the Secretary of the Navy, on places like the Port of Manzanillo and other places to help in the modernization of the ports. And then keeping on the theme, if you will, of infrastructures, right, put the border infrastructure and technology, you got to look at the southeast of Mexico, where President Lopez Obrador has made it a priority. We agree with him. We support the efforts in the southeastern part of Mexico. The Corredor de Tehuantepec, where Daniel Baima and AmCham and so many others have been with us, is an opportunity there. And if you look at the growth there over the last year, it's about 6-7%. There we see keys to many of the challenges that we face, including supply chains, but also development in places that need it, as well as dealing with other issues like migration and security. So
Ambassador
a lot of work.
Salazar, can I just ask a question? Because you just mentioned,
Sure.
okay,
I'm sorry.
so you just mentioned migration. And so I've been talking to people over the last few days about questions that they're very interested in. And irregular migration continues to be one of the major issues in North America, but also across the entire hemisphere. And the composition of migrant flows, it's changing constantly. We have migrants from North Central America, Haiti, a growing number of migrants from Haiti, of course, Nicaraguans fleeing the oppressive Ortega regime, Venezuela, Ecuador. And something else is that now all three countries are becoming their destinations for migrants, which I think is something that's really important to point out. Something that Ambassador Moctezuma mentioned is that this is an election year. And in the United States, for example, I mean, we're hearing it. The rhetoric and the politicization of this issue is just going to get worse over the coming year. With the Los Angeles Declaration on Migration and Protection, Canada, the United States, and Mexico were among the countries that committed to creating the conditions for safe, orderly, humane, and regular migration, and to strengthening frameworks for international protection and cooperation. So my question here is, how would you assess our progress towards these goals? How can we do better by working together? And here I thought I'd start with you, Ambassador Clark. I think that we have a lot to learn from Canada when it comes to legal pathways, which was a key part of the LA Declaration.
No, absolutely, Rebecca. You know, you said something very interesting in your question, too. All three countries of North America are now recipient countries of migrants, right? And that's a paradigm shift, I think, for Mexicans who have viewed themselves traditionally as a sort of a transshipment point for people who were moving up to the rest of North America. So I know that's for another debate and for another time, but I simply put that on the table as something that's worth noting and that I have noticed in my 4 years here. If you go to Tijuana or Chihuahua, you're looking at communities of migrants who are looking to settle and to work and to live their lives in Mexico. And that's new, I think. So yes, legal pathways, absolutely what we're about here in Mexico. As you know, we have something called the Seasonal Agricultural Workers Program. We have various other mechanisms that allow for that sort of orderly, transparent, circular migration as well. So it means that somebody in Oaxaca or in Guerrero can join this program, work on a farm for 4 or 5 or 6 months, and then come back to his or her community in Mexico. Because of course, most migrants don't want to leave home. They don't want to leave their families, their communities, or their food, or their traditions, or their culture. And these programs, which we're proud of and which our economy relies on, provide exactly for that safe, transparent, orderly, and temporary work in Canada, and then a return home with family and community.
Thank you. Any comments from Ambassador Moctezuma or Ambassador Salazar?
You want to start?
I'll start, but let me just finish up on Tehuantepec and the transoceanic and southeastern Mexico. That is part of the solution to migration, because what we have to do is to make sure that the sending countries for migration have an opportunity for those migrants to stay there, and that essentially expands out all the three northern Central American countries, but then moving into what is other places that are the sending countries. The fact, I think the most important thing, let me just say, the migration issue is probably the most difficult issue that we're facing right now. And the migration issue, frankly, is also what would place everything at risk that you're all talking about, including USMCA. If there's anything that's going to blow up USMCA, it's going to be that there is a view that there's a migration invasion, as 100 million people are moving around the world, some 20 million people here in the Western Hemisphere. And so it is a key issue that needs to be addressed. The most important thing about that right now is that you have a recognition among many of the countries led by the United States, Mexico, and Canada, that this is a regional issue. It's not just a US issue or a Mexican issue.
Yes.
And we have to work it together. And I think that's what you're seeing in terms of what we, the governments, are trying to do.
Thank you.
Well, I think that if you look at the world, you will see that everywhere in the world, there is a huge wave of migrants. There is a macro wave of migrants all over the world. And one of the specific things that is not clearly done in many countries is really to understand why this migration is taking place. And when you speak to the experts on migration and you ask them, can you give me the data you have recollected from the migrants about why they move, they don't really have it. So one thing that I believe it's very important is to ask the migrants, why do they leave? Because if you want to go to the roots of migration, you need to know what made them move. And in order to put in place different policies, you need to tackle the issues that originated the migration. And this is very, very important and very powerful, because as Ken and Graham said, there are many solutions and there are many paths to a regular and orderly and legal migration. And temporary workers is one of the strongest. So you will understand from asking many, many migrants, what would they want to do, that most of them would say, I would love to go and earn money to build my house in my place and to root in my home.
That's right.
And I want to come back because I don't want to leave my people and my beloveds. So temporary migration, I think, is going to be the future of orderly migration. But this needs to be a conversation within the people that legislate and make the legal path. And the problem we have regarding migration is that this issue cannot be touched in the USA Congress because it's very politicized. And so the big issue is how can you make the Congress understand that to tackle migration, there has to be a conversation that right now is not happening.
Thank you. Excellent points. And it's always good to remind our members of Congress about the importance of comprehensive immigration reform. Ultimately, that is, it's going to be essential. So I have a question. Ambassador Clark mentioned the dinner that you attended last night with, I think you had the Chihuahua. And, you know, when we look at the entire region of the Americas, democratic backsliding is a major concern. And kind of this idea many people in the Americas, across the Americas, are losing faith in democracy as the best form of governance. And we're seeing this trend, I think, in certain parts of the region really growing. But when we look at North America, and at least when I think about what is the North American way really about, and Enrique, I love the idea of promoting this notion of the North American way. It's a commitment to democratic governance and the rule of law. And so I know that in the United States, for example, there's been concern over the past few years about our democratic institutions, and I think it's important to note that. So I'm curious how would you, the three of you, would assess the strength of democratic institutions in North America, and what can we do to increase their resilience?
You're not offering this to anybody in particular.
No, I'm not offering this to anybody in particular. Why don't you start, Ambassador Clark?
Fools run in where angels fear to tread. So, a delicate matter. Obviously, it's not for a Canadian ambassador to comment on the state of democracy in friendly neighboring countries. But I will say a couple of things. The first is, democracy isn't just about people and political leaders. It's about our institutions, the institutions that we've given ourselves in the three countries. And what's interesting is, despite the stresses and strains that we've seen, and we've seen stresses and strains in all three countries, right? The institutional framework has proved remarkably resilient. And that's something, I think, as North Americans, that we can take pride in. We have institutions that work, that provide counterweights, that provide continuity, and that will catch us if we fall as societies. So that's the first thing I'd say. Let's be proud of the resilience of the texture of our institutions in the three countries. And then I'll do a little bit of self-criticism, right? I'm thinking of the Prime Minister going to the UN to talk about our record in Indigenous issues. We're not perfect in Canada. We have issues that we have to deal with in terms of our democracy. We've got to think, for instance, I was talking to Goldie Hyder this morning about the role of diasporas in Canadian politics and how that impacts on our governance. That's something that we need to have a debate on in Canada, frankly, I think, just as we're having a debate rightly on Indigenous truth and reconciliation, right? These are, in some ways, these are fundamental issues to the way Canada is currently functioning and needs to consider going forward. So those would be a couple of comments that I would make.
I particularly appreciate your point about the resilience of institutions across North America.
But it's true.
It's quite remarkable.
This is not some sort of ambassadorial spiel.
No.
I say this as a Canadian citizen, somebody who is deeply attached to the idea of North America, and I take comfort from that. This is not, not just aspirational fantasy thinking. I think it's true.
Yeah. And I think one of the reasons I wanted to ask that question is one of the topics that we've been talking about, or probably one of the key topics over the past 3 days, has been the nearshoring and the importance of seguridad jurídica, which is of course very related. I don't know if either.
Yeah, you've got to ask the other two students in your classroom what they think.
Yes.
Come on. I mean,
Come on,
that's why you get,
I was a
you're the one who
professor.
sat closest to the moderator. That's why you get all the questions.
Well, I think that the point Graham said, it's very important also for Mexico. Many people in the USA ask me how is the democratic institutions in Mexico, and I tell them that what the country have shown is the equilibrium of the state of Mexico as a whole, because there are some proposals that pass the legislative and don't pass the Supreme Court. There are some proposals that do pass the legislative and become laws, and there is an equilibrium inside the Mexican state which shows you how strong are Mexican institutions. And that's something that would have never been proved if there was not this friction. So I think that's a very important point that Ambassador Clark said. And regarding democracy, as democracy is expanding in North America and expanding in Mexico, there are many, many groups that are becoming part of the conversation. So you have gender issues, you have indigenous issues, you have inclusion policies. And when you have more people in the room, of course, the previous arrangement has to be challenged. So if the previous arrangement is challenged because it was not inclusive, that's not that people are dealing with changing democracy. They are using democracy. And they are using democracy in order to be included. And I think that this is a very, very important issue in our times, really to take some distance of what is happening and to understand that as much inclusion you have, as much unrest you will have, which is contradictory because you say if you include more people, the society has to be quieter or smoother, but it's not, because things have to be changed and arranged for a new order. And we're living in that change in the world. And the important thing is that the people that want to change things share values. And I believe that in North America, Mexico, the USA, and Canada share very strong democratic values and share liberty values and inclusion values. And we are opening our politics to people that were left behind, like the indigenous communities. So I think it's a very vibrant North America we're living at, but that it needs us in order to fight for the principles that will show where the future is for all of us.
Let me just add to what Esteban said. We sometimes often speak about a North American economic powerhouse or a North American clean energy powerhouse, how we lead the world. We need to do that also in democracy, where democracy is being tested everywhere, including in our hemisphere, that they look at US, Canada, Mexico as a great example. And there's lots of, I agree with everything Esteban and Graham said, it's about values and shared values, but it's also about strong institutions that have to withstand the test of times under sometimes some very difficult circumstances.
Yes.
And I think one of Enrique's homework assignment for all of us is to go out and to share with our communities the importance of North America integration. And I think this is, of course, a very strong selling point as the shared values that we have. Okay, so I'm looking, I have a clock right here, and I want to make sure that the audience has time to ask some
Terrifying
questions.
clock, actually.
I know, it's like a doomsday clock.
doomsday, I was
No,
gonna say,
it really
it's
is,
like-
and it's red right now, so it's particularly alarming. So why don't we open it up to questions?
Thank you so much for that fantastic conversation. So the first question is, how do you see the trilateral relation for the three countries in the next 5 years in terms of technology and innovation?
In terms of what technology?
And innovation.
Well, I think that it's a key issue. The future is technology and innovation. We are facing huge problems that only technology will help us to solve. Let me put an example, water. We will have to go into technology in order to use the oceans to have fresh water. And we're running late for that. Clean energy is another issue, but that's a much more advanced sector. And in innovation, all the supply chains of North America have to be considered in order to make the region really sustainable. So I think that technology is our future in fighting against drugs and fighting against weapons coming into Mexico. Technology will be our most important tool. So I believe that we have a great hope, because with AI, technology will really boost and help us to deal with many, many problems. So I think that the conversation we're having in the three countries in the North American Leader Summit, that includes cybersecurity, technology, innovation, is a very, very important part of our relationship.
You know, we went through a rather dry period when we weren't having those sort of North American leaders summits and meetings. So let's cross our fingers that the good habits that we are engaged in now will continue on this front and on other fronts, because it's much better that we chat, that we talk, that we exchange information, that we confront our differences than that we not do it.
I agree.
Thank you, Ambassador Salazar. Thank you to all the three ambassadors. So another question from the audience is, we are expecting that there might be some changes to USMCA. So if this opens up, what are the economic consequences? Not only the political aspects, but also the economic complexity of actually reopening the agreement and the dangers around that.
I got the question as on changes on USMCA, if that's what it is. Let me just very quickly say, this is the most modern free trade agreement in the world, and it is working and working very well. There are issues there. There are issues that we have in panels. We have a panel on quorum. I expect we need to, and we'll have a panel on energy. But that's what an agreement is for. If you don't have an agreement, then those things don't ever get resolved. But fortunately, within USMCA, there's dispute resolution mechanisms there. I thought I had 30 minutes to speak when I first saw that little timer down there, but I know I don't. But just going back to the question of looking ahead, I think what's really, we have elections coming up, and we have a lot of hot air and a lot of divisiveness in the United States and here in Mexico as well. But the reality, I think we need to be looking at 2030. And the work I do every day is about doing what I'm doing now, but with the vision that we're building the USMCA relationship all the way through 2030 in all of its manifestations of the relationship beyond just economics as well.
You know, I bounce the question back to the audience, right? And say what I said in my opening statement. It isn't just for governments to negotiate or talk about this. It's about the private sector to make the case, not just for their own interests, but for the sake of our societies. And so my challenge to you as leaders of business communities in the three countries is to make the case, right? Make the case for the arrangement that we have in North America, the uniqueness, as Ken says, of what we have, and to explain it to our peoples. Where a lot of people in our societies don't, in some cases, it's simply a given of the way our economies happen to be organized, but there are poles of resistance, and that's why it's important, I think, that your voice as representatives of the private sector be heard.
And I think that we really have to be aware of the strength of the USMCA. Living in Washington, you get to speak with many, many representatives of all the world. And the world is jealous of Canada and Mexico and the US of having this agreement.
Yes, that's very true.
Because this agreement is the most, I think it's the best example of effective and a deliverable agreement among neighbors. And we also have to recognize that what we committed in that agreement has delivered such important results that we really have to be much more vocal about that, because it's very, very easy to forget that. And while having the trade agreement, we started to build a cultural integration also. So the three countries really share many, many cultural and values that is part of the trade agreements. I think that one important thing is the will to push toward this integration. And we have integration in production because many times it's not that Mexico and the US trade things. They are producing together. We are really integrating an economy, and that's very, very powerful. But also in politics, you need leaders that want and have the will to do that. And I recognize very much the will of the Canadian government and the US government to keep showing this interest in building up a strong North America. And the great ambassador we have, which is Ken Salazar, that has been very, very important for the bilateral relationship.
So we are out of time, but I think that those closing remarks, I know we're in single digit seconds, so.
Let's leave it there.
But I think your comments were a perfect way to conclude, Ambassador Moctezuma. Integration is fundamental to our success, and we are much better off when we work together.
Yeah.
Safe at home.
Perfect. Thank you so much to the three ambassadors.